Alabama found itself shaken by a wave of deadly attacks that left communities in fear and law enforcement scrambling for answers. The only clues left behind? Grainy security footage capturing the suspects mid-flight. With no clear leads, the FBI and local police began tracking their movements, believed to be heading north along the East Coast. One thing was certain. The pursuit wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Surveillance cameras, though often overlooked, can turn out to be crucial witnesses. That was exactly the case following a brutal killing at a gas station in Alabama. 3 armed suspects fled the scene, but not before being caught on video. Dressed to intimidate and heavily armed, they made it clear they'd rather die than be captured. Former FBI New York Field Office Chief Carl Stone recalls how the fugitives crossed multiple state lines, trying to stay ahead of the investigation. Agents were hopeful they could bring them in without more bloodshed. Back in the 1990s, Birmingham, Alabama, was seeing a drop in both its population and crime rates. But even in safer cities, violence can strike. On May 18, 1996, a customer stumbled upon a horrifying scene at a local gas station. The clerk had been fatally shot. A 911 call was made, and Birmingham police arrived quickly. They identified the victim. He was the only one working that day. Unfortunately, the customer who discovered the body hadn't witnessed the crime. Investigators followed a trail of blood that led from behind the counter out to the parking lot. It appeared the victim had tried to get help, but only made it as far as the pavement before collapsing. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery gone wrong. But something didn't add up. Cash was still on the counter, and the register hadn't even been opened. No fingerprints, no witnesses. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air. The police sent the security tape to their lab, but the footage was poor, worn down from being reused too many times. Still, technicians did everything they could to clean it up and enhance the images. Once the footage was restored, detectives could piece together the crime. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. The attacker had shot the clerk despite the man's full cooperation. It looked like a senseless execution. Investigators pulled still images from the video, hoping to highlight any distinct facial features that might help ID the suspect. The Birmingham police cross-referenced the visuals with known criminal databases, but came up empty-handed. Desperate for a lead, detectives interviewed the victim's family and friends, hoping someone might recognize the killer or provide insight into a possible motive. But no one did. All they had was a blurry image, and with no additional clues, the case stalled. Then, about 2 months later, 20 miles south of Birmingham, the sheriff's office in Shelby County received a disturbing phone call. 2 suspicious individuals had been spotted at a local pawn shop. At the time, no one knew what was coming. In such a quiet area, a deadly crime was the last thing anyone expected. When authorities arrived at the scene, they were stunned. The pawn shop owner had been gunned down, and a female employee had been shot in the head. She was in critical condition. Officers quickly set up roadblocks, checking every vehicle for suspicious activity. Though they had no solid leads, they hoped someone might spot something unusual. As paramedics raced to save the injured woman, investigators assessed the scene. Over $2,300 in cash had been taken, along with jewelry and nearly all the firearms from a nearby gun case. Given the foot traffic in and out of the shop, collecting fingerprints was overwhelming and not especially helpful. What they could use, though, were the shell casings left behind. The murder weapon? A 9mm handgun. At this point, detectives weren't sure if the shooting was an isolated incident or part of a string of violent crimes. But the similarities to the earlier gas station murder were hard to ignore. They looked for surveillance footage. The first system appeared to be a dummy setup, but then someone remembered. The owner had recently talked about installing a hidden camera. And sure enough, it was still rolling. At exactly 3:23 p.m., the surveillance footage captures 2 young men walking into the pawn shop. One officer immediately says, "Wait, I recognize him." Moments later, the men violently force the store owner and a female employee behind the counter. Outside, a red vehicle sits idling. Investigators suspect it might be the getaway car. Over the next 13 minutes, the captives are held at gunpoint, watching in fear as the 2 men ransack the place. Then, without warning, the robbers opened fire, showing absolutely no hesitation or mercy. What makes it more chilling is that the victims had fully cooperated. They didn't fight back. They didn't resist. And still they were shot. Seeing that footage was deeply disturbing, even for seasoned detectives like Donald King and his partner. While combing through the crime scene, they noticed something strange: a pile of debris behind the counter. There was no trash can nearby. In that heap, they found tiny metal shavings, right next to a key-cutting machine. It looked like the killers might have taken the trash can with them, possibly to eliminate any remaining evidence. Federal law requires every firearm sale to be meticulously documented, and all the weapons in that shop had been for sale. Detectives asked another employee to cross-reference the stolen weapons with those that remained. The results were shocking. 32 guns were missing. The robbers had taken an entire arsenal with them. That raised serious concerns. What kind of destruction could these heavily armed individuals be planning next? Given the gravity of the situation, prosecutors got involved immediately. District Attorney Randy Hillman joined the case, coordinating closely with police. The footage from the hidden security camera became their most powerful piece of evidence. As the video shows, the stolen goods were loaded into a guitar case. One of the suspects fires again, but his gun jams. Without missing a beat, he reloads and continues shooting. Both suspects then climb into the red pickup truck, both entering through the passenger side. That meant there was a third person, the getaway driver. Technicians pulled stills from the footage, but the resolution was poor. All they had were low-quality images of the suspects and the vehicle. They didn't know who the men were, but what they did know was this: these were dangerous individuals with an alarming tolerance for violence. If they weren't stopped soon, they'd strike again. Just a few hours after the attack, authorities received more bad news. The female employee who had been critically wounded had succumbed to her injuries. Now there were 2 innocent lives lost. Ballistics experts from the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences examined the shell casings and bullets from both the pawn shop and gas station shootings. They hoped it was the same weapon, but no ballistic match was found. Even so, investigators strongly suspected the crimes were connected, so they turned to the public for help. Still images from the surveillance footage were released to local media. With public cooperation, they hoped someone would recognize the men. Key details were kept secret, helping investigators sift through real leads versus wild guesses. Soon after, tips started pouring in. One caller said he'd seen 2 men matching the suspects' descriptions carrying firearms and a guitar case from a red pickup into a nearby house in Birmingham. The detail about the guitar case was never shared publicly, which made this tip particularly credible. The caller also knew the men by their nicknames, Turkey and Maine. Detectives ran those names through the local alias database. Turkey turned out to be 16-year-old Marcus Presley, who resembled a pawn shop shooter. Maine was identified as 18-year-old Samuel Gamble, the second gunman. Both had extensive juvenile records. Authorities knew they were dealing with extremely dangerous individuals. They'd already killed, and chances were high they'd do it again. So when it came time for the raids, police took no chances. Every possible safety measure was in place, including a full SWAT unit. Search warrants were issued, and the team prepared to breach the residence where Gamble was believed to be staying. But when they went in, no one was home. A cold-blooded group of armed fugitives was now on the loose with an entire cache of stolen weapons. Despite the house being empty, investigators weren't ready to give up. They set up a perimeter, knowing they were dealing with highly dangerous fugitives. By July 28, 1996, Alabama authorities were actively hunting Marcus Presley, Samuel Gamble, and a third unknown suspect connected to the deadly pawn shop robbery. A SWAT team conducted a full search of Gamble's residence. It was empty, but Sergeant Russell from Shelby County spotted something that linked directly to the crime scene. He found a broken cassette from the pawn shop surveillance camera. It had clearly been tampered with, the tape pulled out, likely in an effort to destroy any incriminating footage. Next to that, they found an empty guitar case, the same kind used during the robbery to carry the stolen items. This wasn't just coincidence. The suspects were well aware they'd been caught on tape, and they were trying to cover their tracks. In the kitchen, more evidence came to light. Sergeant Donald King discovered a trash can with price tags stuck to the bottom, tags from stolen weapons and jewelry. Also in the bin were metal shavings, identical to those found at the pawn shop crime scene. These clues were painting a clear picture. The killers had been here. One thing that still puzzled investigators was the identity of the third suspect, the getaway driver. While searching the home, they uncovered a pay stub issued to a man named Stephen McKinney from Boston. He didn't have a listed address in the region, but neighbors claimed he was a known associate of Gamble and Presley. Police conducted another search at a separate location connected to McKinney. That home also came up empty. During this raid, the grandmother of one of the suspects came back while officers were still inside. After confirming the warrant, detectives asked if she recognized anyone from the surveillance photos. She quietly pointed to two of the young men. Heartbroken, she admitted that one of them was her grandson. She had tried hard to raise him right, but over the years, he'd fallen into gang life and drugs. Sometimes he would disappear for weeks, she told him, visibly shaken after learning he was now wanted for murder. The officers thanked her for her help and allowed her to wait on the porch while they finished their search. District Attorney Randy Hillman later commented on how challenging the investigation had become. These weren't individuals tied to one place. They were young, mobile, and unpredictable. Unlike average citizens, they didn't have permanent addresses and could vanish without warning. Detectives canvassed the area around where Gamble and Presley were last seen. Locals mentioned that the two had been showing off new jewelry and giving out weapons to gang members, enough to arm a small militia. Others reported spotting them in the neighborhood as recently as a few days prior. The team collected possible addresses and began checking each one. Then came a breakthrough. At one of the last addresses on their list, investigators noticed something: a red pickup truck parked outside. It was the same vehicle seen in the surveillance footage. It didn't have license plates, but they noted the VIN vehicle identification number and began running it through databases. Inside the windshield, they spotted a parking pass. Detectives hoped this would lead them to someone who could provide more information. Soon, they tracked down a man who turned out to be Gamble's uncle. He agreed to talk, but only away from his house. He didn't want to be seen with police in the neighborhood. As they drove and spoke privately, the uncle revealed the pickup truck belonged to Stephen McKinney, a friend of his nephew's. He hadn't seen McKinney recently, but thought he might be in Boston. That lined up with the address on the pay stub they had found earlier. He also admitted that just a few days ago, Gamble, Presley, and McKinney had all been staying at his home. But now they were gone. The uncle didn't want to say much at first, but after persistent questioning, he finally admitted they had talked about heading north to Boston. When officers confirmed ownership of the pickup, it was indeed registered to Stephen McKinney, believed to be the getaway driver. With this new evidence, the uncle allowed a full search of his house. One officer suggested checking under the porch, and that's when they found it: a paintball gun with a serial number that matched one of the weapons stolen from the pawn shop. Although they now had probable cause to seize McKinney's truck, forensic technicians couldn't find anything else in it that directly linked him to the murders. Once it became clear that the suspect had crossed state lines, authorities in Shelby County reached out to the FBI for backup. They needed help tracking down the trio responsible for 2 brutal robberies turned homicides. With enough evidence in hand, federal agents were cleared to step into the case. The FBI wasted no time re-interviewing the suspect's known associates. Friends of Samuel Gamble and Marcus Presley revealed that both young men were acting erratic and paranoid. Most chilling of all, they had openly stated that they would never be taken alive. In Alabama, law enforcement was working around the clock to catch all 3 men. As the search intensified, the government increased the reward for information leading to the arrest of Gamble, Presley, and Stephen McKinney, the suspected getaway driver. FBI Special Agent Jeff Newton believed the trio had already made their way from Alabama to Boston. When suspects are wanted for a double homicide, they get bumped to the top of the FBI's most wanted list. Newton immediately contacted his counterparts in Boston and warned them, "Some very dangerous men are either on their way or already in your city." He sent over photos and detailed profiles, emphasizing how unpredictable and violent these suspects were. At the Boston field office, Special Agent Joseph Altman received the call. He understood the gravity of the situation. Based on their actions, these men wouldn't hesitate to kill again, possibly even law enforcement officers. The agents in Birmingham also provided a list of locations where the suspects might be hiding, including construction company where McKinney had once worked. When the Boston agents visited the job site, the foreman told them McKinney hadn't been seen in weeks, maybe even months. Clearly, he had no intention of returning. Although the foreman kept an employee file, it didn't contain any updated contact information. So, the team followed another lead, an address tied to one of Gamble's uncles. When agents arrived at the residence, they maintained a low profile. They didn't want to alert anyone who might tip off the suspects. After a few hours of surveillance, a man exited the house. He wasn't one of the suspects, but agents waited until he was alone before approaching him. When questioned, he admitted no one was home. Not Gamble, not Presley, not even the uncle. Still, he had seen the fugitives recently, though he didn't know where they had gone. Even though the house no longer held any immediate value for the investigation, agents secured a search warrant just in case. But again, they came up empty-handed. Next on the list was an address in Roxbury, a neighborhood just south of Boston. Agents monitored the area for hours, hoping to spot something, but it was yet another dead end. On August 1st, 1996, the FBI held a press conference. They warned the public that these three suspects were extremely dangerous and likely armed. The fugitives were officially wanted in connection with homicides in Alabama, and arresting them was a top priority. Wanted posters were distributed, and a dedicated tip line was set up. Thanks to the media coverage, new leads began pouring in. One report mentioned a location just outside Boston, believed to be a possible hideout for McKinney, the getaway driver. However, there was no evidence that Gamble or Presley were there with him. Still, the FBI couldn't afford to take any chances. They assembled a tactical team to prepare for a high-risk entry. Everyone was briefed to expect resistance. When the team stormed the house, they caught McKinney by surprise. He was unarmed and taken into custody without incident. But Presley and Gamble were nowhere to be found. They were still on the run, armed and dangerous. Inside McKinney's residence, investigators uncovered items that confirmed his involvement. Jewelry stolen from the pawn shop was recovered, along with 3 of the 32 missing firearms. Serial numbers matched those taken in the Alabama heist. Despite these findings, there were no signs indicating where the other 2 suspects might be. McKinney was officially arrested and charged with aiding and abetting. Authorities quickly notified District Attorney Randy Hillman in Shelby County, Alabama. They needed to act fast before the trail went cold. Following McKinney's arrest, authorities in Shelby County acted fast. Prosecutor Randy Hillman flew to Boston to assist with the ongoing investigation. Everyone hoped McKinney might finally lead them to the other 2 fugitives, Presley and Gamble. The stakes were high, and the danger was real. These were heavily armed individuals who had already proven they'd kill without hesitation. During questioning, McKinney was confronted with the evidence against him. Investigators hoped that offering the possibility of a lighter sentence would encourage him to talk. Eventually, he cracked. He admitted that he, Presley, and Gamble had planned the robbery in mid-July over drinks. They scoped out the pawn shop, believed it would be an easy target, plenty of cash, guns, and jewelry, with no real security. McKinney described what happened. On July 25th, they arrived in his pickup truck. Presley and Gamble went inside, while McKinney waited outside. The plan was simple: get in, grab the goods, and get out. But then he heard gunshots. The 2 suspects came running out with their loot, and they all sped away. When pressed about Presley and Gamble's current whereabouts, McKinney claimed he didn't know. He said they might still be in the area, but he couldn't be sure. Investigators were skeptical. They were convinced he was holding something back. They gave him some space, hoping time would make him more cooperative. Eventually, he admitted he had information on places the fugitives might be hiding, addresses of homes they had stayed in before. Still, his vague responses made authorities question his honesty. It was clear McKinney knew more than he was letting on. In court, his statement alone wouldn't be enough. The prosecution decided to rely on their most reliable witness, the surveillance footage. The video was sent to the FBI's media lab, where a specialist named Dalen was assigned to enhance it. The footage, recorded on an old VHS tape, was grainy and poorly lit, especially near the windows. People on the video appeared mostly as silhouettes, but as the suspects moved closer to the camera, the images improved. Dalen focused on the best shots where the men were most visible. He digitized the video, then applied a series of filters to brighten and clarify the footage. The results were impressive. Now, both the suspects' faces and the weapons were much more visible. Their movements inside the shop were also clearer. With this improved footage, the case against Gamble and Presley became even stronger. Meanwhile, the FBI was monitoring a house in Roxbury, Massachusetts. A tip suggested the fugitives might be hiding there. For Special Agent Joseph Altman, it was the best lead yet. Over the next 40 hours, signs from inside the house made it seem likely that someone was still there. A SWAT team was prepped and ready to move. Just before the order came down, a man stepped out of the house. Agents believed he was Gamble's uncle. They approached him with questions, knowing he was on probation. As part of his probation, he had waived certain rights, which allowed agents to search him without a warrant. During the search, they discovered a pistol, one of the firearms stolen in the Alabama pawn shop robbery. Although the uncle claimed Gamble and Presley weren't inside the house anymore, agents doubted him. He clearly had ties to the suspects, and now they had physical evidence linking him to the case. Because Presley and Gamble had declared they'd never be taken alive, the team prepared for a potential shootout. They entered the house with caution, clearing each room. But it was empty. No suspects. What they did find were more clues, bags and personal belongings that belonged to Presley and Gamble. Photos showed the two men boarding a bus, confirming that they had recently been at that location. Even their clothing from the day of the pawn shop robbery was found inside the house. Additionally, investigators recovered one of the murder weapons. There was no doubt anymore. The suspect had been in that house. When asked about their next destination, the uncle revealed that the pair had boarded a bus to Virginia, headed to visit Gamble's girlfriend. He confirmed they were armed when they left. The authorities had missed them by just a few hours. It was now a race against time. After the fugitives narrowly escaped arrest in Boston, agents dug deeper. One of the suspect's uncles revealed that the pair had taken a bus to Virginia, heading to visit Gamble's girlfriend. He wasn't sure of her exact address, but the tip was good enough to narrow down the search. The FBI began analyzing phone records from the Boston hideout, combing through hours of call data. After nearly 48 hours, they found a lead, a number repeatedly called both before and after the crimes. It was registered in Norfolk, Virginia. On August 8, Special Agent John Harley received the call and was assigned to follow up. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Young suspects like Presley and Gamble were unpredictable, making them harder to catch than older, more routine-driven offenders. By 5:30 the next morning, the FBI team was in position. A man answered the door. At first, agents weren't sure if he matched any suspect descriptions, but they secured the scene and asked to search the apartment. He agreed. When shown photos of Gamble and Presley, the man immediately recognized them. He'd hosted a party the week before, and two men matching their appearance had been there, alongside a woman believed to be Gamble's girlfriend. Though the suspect were gone, he gave agents her address. Time was of the essence. A tactical arrest team was sent to the woman's apartment. It was located on the 3rd floor, and no one knew how heavily armed the fugitives might be. The local police cordoned off the area, while FBI agents scoped out the building. It was 9 a.m. Sunlight was pouring in, and agents feared the suspects might wake up and make a run for it. The team split into two groups. One climbed up the fire escape, tough terrain, but it gave him the element of surprise. Meanwhile, 2 state police officers guarded the main entrance in case anyone tried to slip out. There wasn't time to get a warrant. To legally enter, they either needed to see one of the suspects or receive permission from someone inside. Then, they spotted an older man through the window. They made contact, explained the situation, and asked if they could enter. He nodded and let them in. Inside, they quickly found Marcus Presley and arrested him without incident. He had no chance to warn his partner. In another room, they located Samuel Gamble. Startled and confused, he asked, "What's going on?" But it was too late. Both were identified on the spot using photos from the crime scene. U.S. Marshals escorted the fugitives back to Shelby County, Alabama. During questioning, Gamble blamed Presley for the murders. Presley pointed right back. They both assumed that by destroying the security tapes, there would be no evidence left. But once they saw the enhanced footage, they realized they were caught red-handed. With everything on video, their lies fell apart. Eventually, Presley confessed, not only to the pawn shop murders, but also to the gas station killing in Birmingham. He said he thought the clerk was reaching for a weapon and panicked. In 1997, all three suspects faced separate trials. Stephen McKinney, the getaway driver, was sentenced to 50 years in prison for his role. Samuel Gamble received the death penalty for the double homicide at the pawn shop. Marcus Presley was sentenced to death for the gas station murder, and again for his role in the pawn shop killings. Jurors were stunned by the footage. Many said they had grown numb to violence on television, but this was different. This was real. The raw, unfiltered recording showed two people being senselessly executed. It left a lasting impact. In a twist of fate, the pawn shop owner became a crucial witness in solving his own murder. His decision to install a dummy camera, while secretly running a real one, gave law enforcement the key evidence they needed. Without that video, the case might have gone cold. Thanks to his foresight, justice was served.